Hey Adam, how are you?
Good. How are you, Josh?
I'm good.
Great, great. Where are you?
Just north of Chicago. I'm in like where all the John Hughes movies are set, basically.
Oh, really? In the suburbs?
Yeah, it's where Risky Business was set.
Oh, is that right?
Weirdly enough, and yeah, all the John Hughes movies were kind of filmed either at the high school I went to for.
Did you cut classes and go join parades and drive
Yeah, I did not.
convertibles?
It's funny. My kids love watching Ferris Bueller all the time, and they think that must have been what it was like, and that's like what high school is like.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, no, 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 not on my watch. I'm like,
My experience was wholly different than that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Then, what was your entry into your interest in film?
I was always like a movie person. That was even as a little kid. I watched much smaller selection than there is today, but I loved movies. But just as a general fan as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And what was like a total movie slut. I would see anything, and really kind of continued that way for quite a long time. And then as far as I've never been like a film scholar type, but I've always loved kind of old Hollywood
Yes.
biographies of old Hollywood people. As a writer, I think I've always wanted to write about people like that, and never. I've always been jealous when other people have taken the opportunity to do so,
Mm-hmm.
because it's such a dwindling area. Because there are only, at a certain point, there are only so many books that can be written about these folks, and there's, really super. They don't make people like that, and that
No,
world
they
doesn't
don't. You're right.
exist.
Larger than life. Yeah.
Yeah, so people like that can't exist. So yeah, and I've always loved that kind of thing. I've read every biography of like Bogart and Spencer Tracy and Cary Grant and all those guys. Always with an enormous.
Yeah, the
Always
icons.
loved it, and with a huge amount of jealousy.
Well, did you study writing or journalism? What was your way into writing, to becoming a writer?
I'm trying to think now how long ago it was. I did a couple things after college. I worked in advertising, I went to law school, and I worked for my family's business. And when my family's business got sold when I was in my late 20s, had this kind of point where I was like, okay, if I'm going to be a writer, it's now. And so I went and got a master's degree in journalism at Northwestern, and that was my entry point into doing it. I think I needed the discipline and the training of that to really, I would have never had any idea of how to make a living doing this if I had just jumped into it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I did that, and I came out of Northwestern, and not intending to become a freelance magazine writer, but I wound up really quickly having more work than I knew what to do with through a
Really?
bunch of different circumstances. Thankfully, that transitioned into other things, but it was great while it lasted. It was I think if one of the things I figured out was that if you can do good work, and if you can actually are interested in going after work rather than kind of wishing people would just bring you work, that made a big difference.
You also continue to teach at Northwestern?
Yeah, I took some time off to work on the book, and I taught a couple times while working on the book. I'm currently probably not teaching until the fall, but yeah, I teach magazine article writing, and I teach sometimes nonfiction book writing.
Very good. Well, speaking of nonfiction writing, this brings us to today and your the recent publication of your new book, Orson Welles' last movie, the making of The Other Side of the Wind, which I recently read. What an adventure story it seems like from how you described your love of the old movie stars and, just these larger-than-life characters that were actually real people, but they were also characters, that you were able to take that and sort of engage with it and create a book about it. Let me rephrase. You were able to take this passion and this love of yours that you have always had and finally write a book about it. So when did this idea of writing about this as yet unreleased film come about?
I think I was halfway through my last book, and this was my third book, and my experience is that about halfway through a book, I come to a point where I go, oh my god, this is not going to work, and
Uh-oh.
I'm going to have to give the money back, and I'm going to be destroyed, and this is horrible, and what am I going to do? And at that point, I usually find some kind of distraction. And in this case, the distraction was a book. I'm not sure which one right now, but it was a book about Wells. And there were some other side of the wind stories in it. And one thing that was, immediately apparent, I had heard about the movie over the years and read about it in various biographies and, magazine articles and bits and places. And everything about the story was in bits and pieces. Nobody had even a remotely comprehensive version of this story. So I read a couple of the stories, and I am quite certain that one of them was John Huston driving the car the wrong way on the highway.
Oh, right.
And I was like, oh my God, and I was so screwed on the other book at the time, which I finally finished, but I was like, now if I could write about something like that would be fantastic. And then there was also one of the things, I started doing a little bit of research on it because it was a good distraction. And the more and more I got into it, and there's Joe McBride's book, Whatever Happened to Orson Welles, does give a pretty good recounting of a lot of it, and is a great book. And one of the things I found in there was this moment where in the middle, 5 years into production, Welles was completely frustrated and screamed the old Hollywood line of, who do I have to fuck to get off this picture? And I remember thinking, he's the producer, he's the director, he's the writer. I was like, and literally I thought to myself, oh, he's got to fuck himself. And
that should have been the name of your book.
I hate to say that was like the origin of the book, but I was like, that with there's this whole way in which I felt like there was this circular,
yes,
but meaningful aspect to the story that was about more than just the making of an unfinished movie, and that kind of encompassed it. Was this guy kind of trapped, this incredible director trapped within his own creation?
Well, it's not quite an undoing, but it is a cycle of sorts where he's constantly getting caught in this ongoing cycle where he starts a project and then creates all sorts of fantasies almost about, like, who's his friends, who are his enemies, and he has to create this drama, this tension. And, of course, it's all financially, everything's precarious financially, and so it ends up kind of imploding on him, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. One of the things that was, I really loved about the book was, unless I'm missing something that's going to happen in the future, this was the most intelligent, most talented guy I'll ever write about.
Sure.
An and guy with incredible charm, and with who possessed a level of creativity that is almost incomprehensible.
And they're all like being really being just abused by him on the set. One guy in the book said just to be looked at by Orson Welles thought it was worth the whole time.
Oh, absolutely. I
just
mean,
to be looked at.
Yeah, that was a huge thing. I mean, he drew these people in, and people, person after person said to me that, nothing mattered except, A, that you were around Orson Welles. And not because he was, Orson Welles, the big celebrity, but because he was Orson Welles, the filmmaker. So it was important to be around him, and it was also important to help him do something. That seemed like such a worthy endeavor to people. Mm-hmm. And a compelling endeavor, something that they almost couldn't pull themselves away from. And he was great with all that stuff. And what was stunning to me was, and I learned after a while that it was a little bit too much of an expectation to think that it would be otherwise, but that a guy that smart and that talented could have such blind spots about his own behavior. And then I kind of learned that he, in some ways, he really, I think, saw and accepted his own behavior after a fashion. He knew how bad he was with money. He knew how bad he was at picking partners. It didn't stop him. But there was a great line where he said something about having always had the worst taste in business partners. You're always picking someone who was about to go bankrupt, or someone who was going to rob him, or someone who was going to do the one thing that would set him off completely. And he said to somebody, I get it. I'm like the guy who every time he walks out of the house gets struck by lightning. And at a certain point you start to think, perhaps this is not the lightning's fault. And, so he saw it. He knew. But he couldn't control that aspect of his life. And I kind of gave up the expectation after a while. At first I was like, he's so smart, how can he not see this? And then I thought, okay, he sees it. he can't control it. Just like, people who are alcoholics can't control that sometimes. And, I can't control in the middle of the night. We all have things we can't control, and he would be perfect if he didn't do those things.
Mm. I don't know what your age is, but
I'm 48.
Okay, very good. So we're close in age, and so by the time you and I, when Orson Welles was when we started seeing him, and he was kind of washed up in as we, for shorthand, and he was doing talk shows and occasionally even game shows. He was doing commercials. So, I think it runs counter to this idea that even then he was still artistically vital. And even though he might have been his own worst enemy in some cases, he was still trying to get real, legitimate artistic films made.
Right. Well, one of the interesting things about him is you've got the guy who's, arguably the greatest film artist ever, and who, when we were growing up, at the same time was, the world's, most famous kind of pitchman who everybody thought, wow, he's really beneath himself doing all these things. Why would such a great man be doing Parmesan wine commercials? And so there was this huge dichotomy between the public perception of who this guy was and the reality of who he was as an artist. And I think one of the really interesting things was he never stopped thinking of himself as a really viable artist. And there's something actually really incredible about how hopeful he was in the making of this film. After all the things he'd been through, that he always kind of thought, with this movie and with others, but I think especially with this movie, that this is going to be the one that makes it all come back. And that, gives me the career back, that gets me the money I don't have, and all those things.
There's always that, it's like this, I don't know, it's like this ongoing scratched record, you know what I mean? Like we all have this on some level where we keep setting ourselves up in this cycle that we can't kind of break from. But his was just on a spectacular level. That's all.
Everything he did was on a spectacular level.
That's very true. That's very true.
He couldn't. There's a great story from Henry Jaglom where his first movie had come out, and they were having lunch together, and Orson Welles was reading him the reviews of his movie. And Henry Jaglom said, Orson, I really appreciate you're doing all of this, but, I've read all these reviews. And Wells said, right, but you haven't heard me read them. And, that was kind of his...
Yeah.
He was great at that. I mean, he was like, he viewed his life in a lot of ways, in certain moments, as, hey, I got to play Orson Welles. And, yes, you've read those reviews, but you haven't heard them read to you by Orson Welles at this great, extraordinary, dramatic moment. And he did that. I mean, he was, this movie, one of the really fascinating things is all these people who worked on it, I think even people who went on to achieve really great things, this is something they always remember. If they were there for a day, or if they were there for a month, or there for a week. Being around him for any period of time was like a gigantic part of your life experience.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure. It's caught in the whirlwind.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it never got finished, and this is the year that Orson Welles would have turned 100. So
right.
There's been a lot of attention and retrospectives and that type of thing that's been going on around the country, probably around the world. And your book was nicely timed with that as well. What is the status of The Other Side of the Wind?
Well, the film was... After 1976, he worked on the film for 6 years between 70 and 76. And it was funded by the Chevron's brother-in-law primarily. And as the 70s wore on and trouble started in Iran, and Wells started feeling pressure from the Iranians, it became hopeless in some ways, even though they tried to finish it. The film got impounded in France under a strange French copyright law attached to it that really muddled who owned what. And by the time Wells died, it was really kind of stuck in this mess. And the mess got worse after he died because he left behind a not-so-tidy estate. And an extremely not tidy estate. I mean, it was everything you would expect his estate would be. It was just kind of a big mess that pitted people against each other and all kinds of stuff. So it was like under this curse almost And people have tried to finish it innumerable times since Wells died. And Gary Graver, his cinematographer, really gave, the next 20 years of his life to trying to get this movie finished. And all kinds of people had been involved over the years. And in fact, somebody had asked me, they said, when they did an article about the possible completion of the film in the New York Times last fall, the person who was writing the story she said, well, how many people have tried to finish this movie over the years? And I said, I think I recount, 10 or 12 in the book, but I can't give you a number because I know the second I say it's X number, the next day I'm going to start getting emails from people who say, oh, I tried to finish that movie.
Sure.
And sure enough, literally that thing was in the paper, and I got emails from 3 different people who claimed they had tried to finish the movie over the years. And so it's just this bizarre tale of, that involves everything.
Right, and that's one that's taken on mythic proportion and has also, I can see that. So I know that there was recently a crowdsource fundraiser to raise money to complete the film.
Yes. So what happened was that, in last fall, a group, including Frank Marshall, who, giant producer who had worked on the film as a line producer, and a guy named Philip Janrimsa, who had been working on this for about 5 years, had kind of pulled all the rights together and gotten people to at least agree in principle, and to let them try to finish the film. And so they were able to get this film out of a lab in Paris, where it's been sitting untouched for more than 30 years, like 40 years. And what happened was, now they tried to get a distributor, and to get the distributor, they had to cut together footage from the negative to show. And they needed to raise the money. So to get the distributor to give them the money, they needed to raise money to finish the film. Or not to finish the film, but to make something that they could show to distributors to get the money to really finish the film. So they wound up trying to raise funds through crowdsourcing, through Indiegogo, and the campaign still goes on, and they're trying to raise $2 million.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it, in a way, and they're great people, and what they are doing is they're doing everything for the right reasons, and they're doing it, trying to do it the right way. But what's been, interesting and also sad is how it's really faces a lot of the same problems that Wells faced throughout his life. They haven't been able to raise so far the amount of money that they wanted to raise. And, all these things that you think would go, where you have this perfect timing. They announced it the day after Wells's 100th birthday and all these things. And it's, really kind of, been sad because they deserve better. And it's not $2 million is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money in the scheme of things that way. Yeah, and I think they've struggled a bit. And I hope they're able to get it done because they've put a huge amount of effort into it. It would be great for the movie to be out in the world. And it's really, it kind of still falls under, until that happens, under this weird cursed tragedy of this film, like the film that couldn't get finished, that symbolizes all of the things that made Wells films fall apart financially.
Well, again, the book is called Orson Welles' Last Movie, The Making of The Other Side of the Wind, and the author we've been talking with is Josh Karp. Josh, do you have any other project now? You obviously need to get back and return emails and clean the bathroom and do your laundry and all after. And I know you're probably back to teaching, but do you have another idea in mind for your next book?
Right now I'm actually I'm trying to think of what to do for my next book, which I've not come upon yet. But I'm working on a TV pilot project and also on a film version of the book. The book was acquired by Beach Hill Productions, and I'm working with Joe Infantolino, who is the producer there, on adapting the book into a feature film. Which is really fun. I always thought, in a lot of ways, that and again, there's this bizarre irony of making a film about somebody making a film about somebody making a film. And that's happening while they're still trying to finish the other film. But yeah, but I always thought, even from the start, and when I was writing the book, I really thought I wanted to make, the story is such a cinematic story that I always, kind of in the back of my mind, hoped, someday I'd be able to make it into a screenplay. So those are the two things I've been working on. I'm currently working on while I try to figure out what my next book is.
Well, it all sounds very exciting and all very worthwhile, and I'm so glad that we were able to manage to hook up and make this happen. So thanks for doing
Oh,
that.
yes. Thank you so much, Adam. I appreciate you doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. The book is available where books are sold, or
Anywhere books are sold, and
yeah.
online, in actual real bookstores, and pretty much everywhere. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you so much.